My baby is coming! Please take me in! Those are the words a terrified teenage girl cries out in the middle of a raging snowstorm, right on the doorstep of a billionaire CEO who hasn't opened his heart to anyone in years. He could have turned her away, but one desperate choice changes everything. Inside that mansion, a miracle happens. A baby's cry breaks the silence of a man who thought his life was over. But what starts as an act of mercy soon spirals into something far bigger, because this girl isn't just running from the cold, she's running from people who would do anything to take her child. As the world finds out what he's done, the powerful man who saved her could lose everything: his company, his name, even his freedom. But the real question isn't what he's risking, it's why he's risking it. What would make a man with everything to lose protect a girl who has nothing left? And when love and faith collide with the world's judgment, who will be saved first? The runaway girl, or the billionaire who let her in? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. In the sprawling mansion perched on the mountainside overlooking Denver, Jonathan Hale sat motionless in his leather armchair. The only sounds breaking the heavy silence were the measured ticks of the grandfather clock in the corner and the fierce howl of the winter storm outside. At 52 years old, he had grown accustomed to spending his holidays alone, finding a strange comfort in the quiet that most would find unbearable. His eyes drifted to the silver-framed photographs on the mantel. Helen's smile, frozen in time, seemed to mock the emptiness of the room. Next to her photo, their daughter Sarah's last school picture showed her missing front teeth and unruly pigtails. 5 years had passed since the accident, but the pain remained as fresh as newly fallen snow. The grandfather clock struck 11, its deep chimes echoing through the cavernous living room. Jonathan reached for his glass of water. He had given up stronger drinks years ago, when an unfamiliar sound cut through the winter night. The doorbell. He sat perfectly still, convinced his mind was playing tricks on him. Nobody ventured up the private mountain road on a normal day, let alone in the middle of a snowstorm on Christmas Eve. The bell rang again, more insistent this time. Jonathan rose slowly from his chair, his joints protesting the sudden movement. Through the frosted glass panels flanking his front door, he could make out a small, hunched figure. His security system hadn't triggered any alarms, which meant whoever it was had somehow made it past his gates on foot. When he opened the heavy oak door, the bitter wind whipped snowflakes into his face. There, illuminated by the porch light, stood a young girl. She couldn't have been more than 17, her dark hair plastered to her face by melting snow. Her coat was soaked through, and she hugged herself tightly, trembling violently. But what caught Jonathan's attention was her swollen belly, clearly visible even through her wet clothes. "My baby is coming," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. "Please, take me in." Jonathan stood frozen in the doorway, memories flooding back with brutal force. Another snowy night, another desperate call for help. But that night had ended in tragedy. His hands began to shake, and for a moment he was back in that hospital waiting room, hearing the words that had shattered his world. But something deeper than memory stirred within him. Perhaps it was the girl's frightened eyes, or maybe it was something more divine, a gentle nudge from above that he hadn't felt in years. Before he could second-guess himself, he reached out to steady her. "Come inside," he said, his voice rough from disuse. The girl took 2 shaky steps forward, then her legs gave out. Jonathan caught her before she could fall, supporting her weight as she sagged against him. A small whimper escaped her lips, and he felt her whole body tense. "How far apart are the contractions?" he asked, helping her toward the nearest sofa. I don't know," she gasped. "They're coming fast. I've been walking for so long. Jonathan's mind raced as he lowered her onto the plush leather couch. The nearest hospital was at least 30 minutes away in good weather. In this storm, it might as well have been on the moon. He grabbed his phone from the side table, but the screen showed no signal. The storm had knocked out the cell towers. The girl let out another pained cry, clutching her stomach. It hurts. It hurts so much. Jonathan knelt beside her, forcing himself to remain calm. What's your name? Evelyn, she managed between rapid breaths. Evelyn Carter. Evelyn, I'm Jonathan Hale. I'm going to help you, but I need you to tell me. How did you get here? Is there someone looking for you? She shook her head, tears mixing with melting snow on her cheeks. I ran away from the shelter. They were going to make me give her up. I couldn't let them take my baby. Another contraction seized her, and this time her scream echoed off the high ceiling. Jonathan quickly stripped off his suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves. The situation was rapidly spinning beyond his control, but he couldn't let panic take over. Not now. Not when this girl and her unborn child needed him. He hurried to gather supplies, clean towels, hot water, his first aid kit. His hands moved with mechanical efficiency, while his mind struggled to process the surreal turn his quiet Christmas Eve had taken. 5 years of carefully maintained solitude were crumbling around him, and at the center of it all was this frightened teenage girl about to give birth in his living room. As he worked, his eyes kept straying to Helen's photograph on the mantel. His late wife had been a labor and delivery nurse. She would have known exactly what to do. The irony wasn't lost on him that after years of avoiding anything that reminded him of his past, he now desperately wished he had paid more attention to her stories about bringing new life into the world. Evelyn's labor progressed quickly, her cries growing more frequent and intense. Jonathan found himself speaking softly to her, words of encouragement he didn't even know he had in him anymore. He helped her change positions, supported her back, and tried to remember everything he'd ever heard about childbirth. I'm scared, Evelyn whispered during a brief respite between contractions. I don't know if I can do this. Jonathan looked into her young face, seeing both terror and determination in her eyes. You can, he said firmly. You're not alone anymore. I'm right here with you. The words surprised him as much as they seemed to comfort her. For the first time in years, he truly meant them. He was here, present in this moment, not hiding behind work or walls of grief. Something was happening in his heart, breaking loose like ice in spring. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the mansion, time seemed to stand still. The grandfather clock continued its steady counting, marking the moments as Christmas Eve ticked toward midnight. Jonathan Hale, who had spent so long pushing the world away, found himself literally helping to bring new life into it. As Evelyn's labor intensified, he silently prayed, the first real prayer he'd offered since losing his family. It wasn't elegant or formal, just a desperate plea for help and guidance. In the back of his mind, he could almost hear Helen's voice coaching him, telling him what to do next. The girl who had appeared on his doorstep like a miracle, or perhaps a divine intervention, was about to change everything. And as Jonathan prepared himself for what was to come, he realized that his carefully ordered world would never be the same again. But for the first time in 5 years, that thought didn't fill him with dread. Instead, he felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope. The sound of running footsteps echoed through the mansion's halls. Mrs. Park burst into the living room first, her usually pristine nurse's uniform hastily thrown over pajamas. Right behind her, Lydia Moore appeared, still tying her robe, her grey hair escaping from its loose bun. "Good Lord in heaven," Lydia gasped, taking in the scene before her. Her eyes moved from the girl on the couch to Jonathan's shell-shocked expression. Mrs. Park wasted no time with questions. She knelt beside Evelyn, checking her pulse and breathing. How far apart are the contractions? Maybe 3 minutes, Jonathan answered, his voice hoarse. I've been trying to time them. We need to move her, now. Mrs. Park's tone was clipped, professional. The guest room on the first floor. It'll be warmer, and we can set up properly. Lydia was already moving, her practical nature taking over. I'll get it ready. Fresh sheets, towels, hot water, everything we need. Jonathan and Mrs. Park carefully helped Evelyn to her feet. She swayed, another contraction hitting her hard. I can't walk, she whimpered. Without hesitation, Jonathan scooped her up in his arms. She weighed almost nothing, this child carrying a child. As he followed Mrs. Park down the hallway, memories crashed over him like waves, carrying Helen through this same corridor, but that time rushing toward tragedy, not life. The guest room had transformed under Lydia's efficient hands. The bed was stripped and remade with clean sheets, extra pillows propped against the headboard. Towels and medical supplies from Mrs. Park's extensive kit lay ready on the bedside table. Easy now, Mrs. Park directed as Jonathan lowered Evelyn onto the bed. Lydia, help her change into something dry. I need to check how far along she is. Jonathan backed away, suddenly unsure of his place in this feminine domain. He found himself pacing the length of the room, each of Evelyn's cries making him flinch. The sound transported him back 5 years to another winter night filled with pain and fear. His daughter had been just 7 years old. A simple car accident, black ice, a skid, a tree. Helen had died instantly, but their little girl had hung on for hours in the hospital, her small body fighting until the very end. Every beep of the monitors, every labored breath had carved itself into his memory. Mr. Hale! Mrs. Park's sharp voice snapped him back to the present. I need you to call Dr. Stevens. The landline should still be working. His hands shook as he dialed the number. The town's elderly doctor answered on the 4th ring, his voice gravelly with sleep. Jonathan quickly explained the situation. I'm on my way, Dr. Stevens said. But this storm, it might take me a while to get there. Put Mrs. Park on the phone. For the next hour, Mrs. Park followed the doctor's instructions, relaying information about Evelyn's progress. Outside, the storm intensified, wind howling against the windows. Dr. Stevens called again, his voice tight with frustration. The roads are completely blocked. You're going to have to deliver this baby without me. Mrs. Park's face remained calm, but Jonathan saw her hands clench briefly. Understood, Doctor. Stay on the line. Lydia had positioned herself behind Evelyn, supporting her back and wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. Her usually chatty nature had given way to quiet strength, murmuring prayers and words of encouragement. The baby's coming fast, Mrs. Park announced. Evelyn, when the next contraction hits, I need you to push. Jonathan found himself by the bed again, unable to leave. Evelyn reached out blindly, and he took her hand without thinking. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her fingers ice cold against his palm. I'm not ready, she sobbed. I'm not ready to be a mother. I'm just a kid myself. You're stronger than you know, Lydia said firmly. The Lord doesn't give us more than we can handle, even if we don't believe it ourselves. Another contraction seized her, and Evelyn screamed. Jonathan's mind flickered between past and present, his daughter's final moments overlapping with this new life struggling to enter the world. He heard himself speaking, though he hardly recognized his own voice. Stay with us, Evelyn. Your baby needs you. Stay right here with us. The next few minutes stretched like hours. Dr. Stevens' tinny voice through the phone mixed with Mrs. Park's steady instructions and Evelyn's increasingly desperate cries. Jonathan felt as if he was standing outside himself, watching this scene unfold like a dream. Then suddenly, piercing through the chaos, came a new sound, high and clear and full of life. A baby's first cry. It's a girl, Mrs. Park announced, her professional demeanor cracking just slightly to reveal a smile. A beautiful, healthy girl. Lydia burst into tears, her prayers turning to praise. Jonathan stared at the tiny bundle as Mrs. Park cleaned her and wrapped her in a soft blanket. The baby's cries softened to whimpers as she was placed in her mother's arms. "Hello," Evelyn whispered, her exhausted face transformed by wonder. "Hello, my little girl." She looked up at the people surrounding her bed, these strangers who had become her lifeline. "I want to name her Grace," she said softly, "because that's what brought us here. Grace." The word hit Jonathan like a physical blow. He backed away from the bed, from the tableau of mother and child, from the overwhelming emotion threatening to break through his carefully constructed walls. His feet carried him to the window, where snow continued to fall in thick, silent flakes. "Grace," he whispered, tasting the name on his tongue. It held everything he had lost and everything he had tried to forget. Faith, hope, love, the possibility of second chances. Behind him, he could hear the baby's soft noises, Lydia's gentle cooing, Mrs. Park's efficient movements as she tended to mother and child. But Jonathan remained at the window, watching the snow transform his world into something new and unfamiliar. The warmth he had thought long dead flickered in his chest like a candle flame in the dark, fragile but undeniably alive. Morning crept into the mansion with a pale, diffused light. The storm hadn't weakened. If anything, it had grown stronger overnight. Snow piled against the windows in thick drifts, and the wind's howl seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. In the guest room, Evelyn stirred awake. Her body ached, but a different kind of warmth filled her heart as she gazed at the sleeping bundle beside her. Baby Grace was nestled in a makeshift bassinet Lydia had crafted from a drawer, lined with the softest blankets in the house. Mrs. Park entered quietly, checking Evelyn's vital signs with practiced efficiency. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Sore," Evelyn admitted, "but okay." Her eyes filled with tears as she looked around the luxurious room. "I can't believe... I never expected..." "Hush now," Mrs. Park said, her stern voice gentled by concern. "Save your strength. Lydia's bringing up some breakfast." As if summoned by her name, Lydia bustled in with a loaded tray. The smell of fresh coffee and warm bread filled the room. "Good morning, dear, and good morning to you too, precious angel." She cooed at the baby. "Mrs. Park, help me set this up properly." Jonathan appeared in the doorway, hanging back like a shadow. His presence made Evelyn straighten, despite her exhaustion. "Mr. Hale," she said, her voice trembling, "I don't know how to thank you. You saved our lives last night." He shifted uncomfortably, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "You needed help," he said simply, as if that explained everything. Lydia arranged breakfast on a small table near the bed. Oatmeal with brown sugar, whole wheat toast, scrambled eggs, and orange juice. "You need to eat, dear. Get your strength back." Evelyn picked up the spoon with shaking fingers. "I haven't had a proper meal in days," she confessed. "The home... they weren't cruel exactly, but..." "The home?" Jonathan spoke up, his voice sharp with sudden interest. Evelyn's spoon clattered against the bowl. "St. Margaret's Home for Unwed Mothers," she said quietly. "I was there for 2 months, but when I found out their plans..." She swallowed hard. "They wanted me to give her up. They had adoptive parents already picked out. They said it was for the best, that someone my age couldn't possibly..." Her voice broke, and Lydia immediately moved to her side, patting her shoulder. "There now, don't upset yourself. You're safe here." Jonathan remained in the doorway, his face unreadable. Mrs. Park watched him carefully as she adjusted Grace's blankets. "I couldn't let them take her," Evelyn continued, her words tumbling out like water through a broken dam. "My own mother. She left when I was 12. I know what it's like to feel unwanted. I couldn't do that to my baby. So I ran. I didn't have anywhere else to go. No family that would take me in. I saw your lights through the storm, and I prayed. I begged God for help." The room fell silent except for Grace's soft breathing and the endless howl of the wind. Jonathan's hands clenched at his sides, his knuckles white. "You should rest," he said finally, his voice rough. "The storm's not letting up anytime soon. We can figure things out when it passes." Without waiting for a response, he turned and disappeared down the hallway. Throughout the day, life in the mansion settled into an odd rhythm. Lydia and Mrs. Park took turns checking on Evelyn and the baby, bringing fresh supplies and quiet encouragement. Jonathan kept his distance, but Lydia noticed him hovering near the guest room door more than once, listening to the soft sounds within. As night fell, the storm showed no signs of weakening. Lydia had insisted on setting up a baby monitor. "Just in case you need anything, dear." The receiving unit sat on Jonathan's bedside table, where he lay sleepless, staring at the ceiling. Around midnight, a sound from the monitor caught his attention. It wasn't crying. Instead, a soft humming filled the room. The melody was so familiar it made his chest ache. He sat up, his heart pounding. Through the monitor he could hear Evelyn's voice, sweet and clear, humming his late wife's favorite lullaby. Helen had sung it countless times in their daughter's nursery, her voice carrying through these same halls. How could this girl possibly know that tune? Unable to resist, Jonathan crept down the hallway to the guest room. The door was slightly ajar, spilling warm lamplight into the corridor. Through the gap, he could see Evelyn in the rocking chair, cradling Grace against her chest. Her eyes were closed as she hummed, swaying gently back and forth. The scene before him was like a photograph from his past come to life. Different faces, but the same tender love, the same gentle melody. Jonathan pressed a hand against the wall, steadying himself as waves of memory washed over him. The music wrapped around him like a forgotten embrace, both blessing and torment, healing and heartbreak all at once. He stood there for a long time, listening as Evelyn's humming gradually faded into the quiet of the night. The storm raged on outside, but in that moment, watching this young mother comfort her child, Jonathan felt something shift inside him, like ice beginning to thaw, letting in the first tentative warmth of spring. Grace made a small sound in her sleep, and Evelyn adjusted her hold, murmuring words too soft to hear. The tenderness in her touch, the protective curve of her body around her child, it spoke of a love Jonathan recognized all too well, a love he had once known, had lost, and had locked away behind walls of grief and isolation. The baby monitor in his hand felt warm now, a living connection to the scene before him. He should turn away, should return to his room and his solitude. But something kept him rooted to the spot, caught between past and present, between memory and reality, between the grief he knew and the grace he feared to accept. Through the gap in the door, Evelyn began to hum again, and Jonathan closed his eyes, letting the familiar melody wash over him. For just this moment, in the heart of the storm, he allowed himself to remember what it felt like to have music in his home, to have love within these walls, to have hope in his heart. The morning light crept through the mansion windows, revealing a transformed world. The storm had finally exhausted itself, leaving behind a pristine blanket of snow that sparkled under the clear Colorado sky. Inside, the house felt different too, as if the fierce storm had somehow cleared the air of more than just clouds. Jonathan stood at his study window, coffee cup warming his hands, watching the sun paint golden streaks across the untouched snow. The sound of tentative footsteps drew his attention. He turned to find Evelyn in the hallway, wearing borrowed clothes that hung loose on her frame. She looked better after a full night's rest, though still pale and uncertain. "Good morning," she said softly, holding baby Grace close to her chest. "I hope we're not disturbing you." "No," Jonathan replied, surprising himself with how much he meant it. "Are you feeling all right?" "Yes, thank you. Mrs. Park brought us breakfast earlier." Evelyn's eyes wandered past him, drawn to something in the adjacent living room. "Oh," she breathed, taking a few steps forward. "Is that—" Jonathan followed her gaze to the grand piano that dominated the corner of the room. Dust had gathered on its gleaming black surface. No one had touched it in years. Evelyn approached it slowly, as if drawn by an invisible thread. "May I?" she asked, glancing back at him. Jonathan nodded, his throat tight. He watched as she carefully adjusted baby Grace in one arm and reached out with her free hand to touch the keys. Her fingers ghosted over them, not pressing down, just feeling their smooth surface. "I used to play at my church," she explained, pulling her hand back quickly. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" "Helen played," Jonathan found himself saying. The name felt strange on his tongue after so long. "My wife. She was a pianist." Evelyn turned to face him, her eyes soft with understanding. "Was she good?" "Very." Jonathan set his coffee down and moved closer to the piano. "She taught music at the local high school. She'd practice here every evening after dinner." His hand traced the edge of the piano lid, leaving a clean line in the dust. "Our daughter would sit right here, watching her mother play." The words came easier than he expected, as if they'd been waiting all this time to be spoken. It was raining that night. Helen was driving Sarah home from her dance recital. The other driver, he ran a red light. They said it was quick, that they didn't suffer. Baby Grace made a small noise, and Evelyn gently swayed to soothe her. "How long ago?" she asked quietly. 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days. Jonathan's voice cracked slightly. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like another lifetime." Evelyn was quiet for a moment, just rocking her baby. Then she said, "God doesn't take love away, you know. He just changes where it lives." Jonathan looked at her sharply, but there was no pretense in her face, no attempt at cheap comfort. Just a simple truth offered from one broken heart to another. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. "My church pastor told me that when my mum left," she replied. "I didn't understand it then. But now—" she looked down at Grace's sleeping face. "Now I think I do." Before Jonathan could respond, the doorbell rang. Mrs. Park hurried to answer it, and moments later, Dr. Williams strode in, shaking snow from his coat. "Finally made it through," he announced, his normally jovial face serious. "How are our patients?" The next hour was filled with careful examination. The doctor checked Evelyn's vital signs, examined baby Grace thoroughly, and asked detailed questions about the birth. Jonathan stood in the doorway, watching as the doctor worked with practiced efficiency. "Well," Dr. Williams said finally, packing away his stethoscope. "Considering the circumstances, I'd say you both came through remarkably well. You did good work here, Jonathan. You saved 2 lives last night." Jonathan shook his head. "The staff did most of it. You opened the door," Evelyn interjected softly. "That was everything." The doctor nodded, but his expression grew serious. "We need to talk, Jonathan, outside." In the hallway, Dr. Williams kept his voice low. The authorities will have questions. A minor giving birth, no medical records, no guardian present. It's going to raise red flags. Jonathan's jaw tightened. She was in danger. She needed help. I'm not arguing that point, the doctor said gently. But you need to be prepared. There will be consequences to keeping her here. They both turned at a small sound. Evelyn stood in the doorway, her face pale but determined. She must have overheard them. Her hand gripped Jonathan's arm, her fingers trembling. Please, she whispered. I can't go back. They'll take her away from me. Jonathan looked down at her hand on his arm, then at baby Grace sleeping peacefully against her chest. The consequences the doctor warned about hung heavy in the air. Legal complications, potential scandal, unwanted attention on a man who'd spent years cultivating privacy. But in that moment, all he could see was a mother's love and a child's need for safety, the very things he'd failed to protect 3 years ago. You're safe here for now, he said firmly, covering her hand with his own. The relief that flooded her face made something in his chest ache, a feeling both painful and strangely welcome, like a frozen limb coming back to life. Dr. Williams watched this exchange with knowing eyes. He pulled out his prescription pad and began writing. I'll leave instructions for postnatal care. Mrs. Park knows how to reach me if there are any concerns. He paused, then added more softly. Sometimes doing the right thing isn't the same as doing the legal thing, Jonathan. Just be prepared. The doctor's words hung in the air as he gathered his things and headed for the door. Jonathan watched him go, feeling the weight of Evelyn's hand still on his arm, hearing the soft breathing of her baby. The morning sun streamed through the windows, making the dust motes dance above the piano keys where, just moments ago, they had shared their first real conversation. For the first time in years, the silence in his house didn't feel empty. It felt like waiting, like possibility, like the pause between musical notes, pregnant with promise of the next measure to come. 3 days after Dr. Williams' visit, the mountain roads finally reopened. The plows had cleared away the last stubborn drifts of snow, and Denver stirred back to life in the valley below. Inside Jonathan's mansion, the temporary bubble of isolation began to dissolve as reality crept back in. Jonathan sat in his home office, staring at his laptop screen filled with hundreds of unread emails. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from board members and business associates. Several contained pointed questions about the emergency vehicles seen outside his property during the storm. He rubbed his temples, trying to craft careful responses that revealed nothing. Down the hall, he could hear Evelyn's soft footsteps. She had insisted on helping around the house, despite Lydia's protests that she should rest. Please, she'd said that morning, her eyes earnest. I need to do something to repay your kindness. Lydia had finally relented, giving her small tasks she could manage while carrying Grace. Jonathan watched through his office doorway as she passed by, carefully dusting picture frames with one hand, while Grace slept peacefully in a sling across her chest. You don't have to do that, he called out, surprising himself by breaking his usual silence. Evelyn turned, offering a small smile. I want to, she said simply. It helps me feel useful. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed again. Another message from his CFO. Jonathan, the board is concerned about your extended absence. We need to schedule an emergency meeting. He sighed heavily. The real world was pressing in, demanding answers he wasn't ready to give. Later that afternoon, Jonathan found himself drawn to the living room by the sound of singing. Evelyn sat in the armchair by the fireplace, rocking Grace gently while singing a hymn he recognized from his own church days. Her voice was clear and sweet, without pretense. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. The irony of the song choice wasn't lost on him, considering his tiny namesake in her arms. He stood in the doorway, watching as she tenderly stroked Grace's cheek between verses. Lydia appeared beside him, wiping her hands on her apron. "That girl's got an angel's voice," she whispered. "Reminds me of Helen, the way she used to sing while gardening." Jonathan felt the familiar pang at his wife's name, but it was different now, less sharp, more bittersweet. Before he could dwell on it, a sharp knock at the front door made them all freeze. Evelyn clutched Grace tighter, her face going pale. Jonathan motioned for her to stay quiet and moved swiftly to answer the door. Through the frosted glass, he could make out a uniform. Sheriff Tom Danner stood on the porch, his badge catching the late afternoon light. "Evening, Jonathan," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Mind if I come in?" Jonathan's heart pounded, but his voice remained steady. "Of course, Tom. What brings you up the mountain?" The sheriff stepped inside, removing his hat. His eyes scanned the foyer with practiced casualness. "Got some reports I need to follow up on. Emergency vehicles during the storm and—" He paused. "A missing teenage mother from St. Catherine's Home for Girls. They're quite concerned about her welfare." From the living room came the faintest sound of Grace fussing. Jonathan saw the sheriff's head turn slightly toward the noise. "That would be my cousin's daughter," Jonathan said smoothly, the lie falling from his lips with surprising ease. "She's staying with me while recovering from a difficult pregnancy. Private family matter." Sheriff Danner's eyes met his, searching. "Your cousin's daughter?" "Yes, on my late wife's side. The poor girl needed a quiet place to recuperate." Jonathan maintained steady eye contact, thanking his years of corporate negotiations for his poker face. The sheriff nodded slowly, but Jonathan could see he wasn't entirely convinced. "Mind if I verify that? Just doing my duty, you understand?" "Of course." Jonathan led him to the living room, where Evelyn sat exactly as before, though her hands trembled slightly as she rocked Grace. "Evening, miss," the sheriff said kindly. "Hello, sir," Evelyn replied, softly, her voice steady despite her obvious fear. Sheriff Danner asked a few more questions, which Evelyn answered with careful vagueness, sticking to their hastily constructed story. Jonathan watched in quiet amazement at her composure. Finally, the sheriff put his hat back on. "Well, everything seems to be in order here, but Jonathan—" He paused at the door. "If you hear anything about that missing girl, you'll let me know." "Of course, Tom. You'll be my first call." After the sheriff left, the house remained silent for several long minutes. Lydia was the first to move, hurrying to make tea, for everyone's nerves. Evelyn remained in the chair, holding Grace close and whispering prayers of thanks. That night, long after everyone else had gone to bed, Jonathan stood in the doorway of Evelyn's room. Grace lay in a borrowed bassinet, her tiny chest rising and falling in peaceful sleep. The moonlight streaming through the window illuminated her innocent face. "What have I gotten myself into?" he whispered to the quiet room. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew the truth. He wouldn't change what he'd done. Couldn't change it. Something had shifted in his frozen heart these past few days, like the first crack in winter ice revealing flowing water beneath. He watched Grace sleep for a moment longer, remembering another baby he'd once watched this way. But for the first time in years, the memory brought more comfort than pain. Perhaps Evelyn had been right about love not disappearing, but simply changing where it lived. In the hallway, the grandfather clock chimed. Midnight, marking the end of another day in this strange, new chapter of his life. Jonathan knew more questions would come, more challenges would arise. The sheriff's visit was likely only the beginning. But as he finally turned away from the sleeping baby, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. the quiet certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be. January melted into February, and the mansion on the mountain began to breathe again. Small changes appeared day by day, like the first hints of spring after a long winter. Potted herbs lined the kitchen windowsill. Basil, rosemary, and mint that Evelyn had started from tiny seeds. Their fresh scent filled the air whenever sunlight warmed the glass. In the living room, delicate spider plants hung in macrame holders that Lydia had discovered in the attic, remnants of Helen's old collection. Evelyn had cleaned them carefully, respecting their history while giving them new life. The green tendrils reached down like gentle fingers, softening the room's formal edges. The biggest change, though, was the sound. Where silence had once ruled, baby Grace's giggles now echoed through the halls. Her laughter rang like tiny bells, especially when Evelyn played peek-a-boo or tickled her growing belly. Even Jonathan found himself pausing in his work to listen, a smile tugging at his lips without his permission. One Tuesday morning, his executive assistant called about an important board meeting in Denver. "I'll attend virtually," Jonathan said, watching through his study window as Evelyn pushed Grace in a borrowed stroller through the snowy garden paths. "The quiet here helps me think better." "Of course, Mr. Hale," his assistant replied, though they both knew the real reason. He hadn't left the property since the night Grace was born, except for essential errands. The thought of missing one of her smiles, one new sound, seemed somehow unbearable. In the kitchen, Lydia hummed as she prepared lunch, her wooden spoon tapping against pot rims in rhythm with the radio. The smell of homemade soup filled the air. Chicken noodle, Grace's current favorite. At 4 months old, she was just starting to show interest in solid foods, watching intently whenever anyone ate. "Look who's awake from her nap!" Evelyn's voice carried from the hallway. She appeared in the kitchen doorway with Grace in her arms, the baby's dark curls wild from sleep. "There's my sweet girl," Lydia cooed, wiping her hands on her apron. "Just in time to help me test this soup." Jonathan looked up from his laptop at the kitchen table, where he'd taken to working more often. Grace's face lit up when she saw him, her little arms reaching out. "Someone wants their Jonathan time," Evelyn said softly. Without hesitation, she transferred Grace into his waiting arms. The baby immediately grabbed his tie, a favorite pastime. "Careful there, little one," he murmured, but made no move to stop her. "This is Italian silk." "She has expensive taste already?" Lydia chuckled, stirring the soup. "Speaking of taste, Evelyn, that bread you baked this morning was heavenly. Where did you learn to make it?" "Church potlucks," Evelyn replied, sitting down with her textbook. "Mrs. Wilson always let me help in the kitchen. Said it was good therapy." Her voice held a touch of nostalgia, but not the deep sadness it once had when speaking of her past. Jonathan watched as she opened her GED study guide, determination clear on her face. She'd been working diligently every day, often late into the night after Grace was asleep. When he'd first suggested the online program, she'd protested that she couldn't afford it. He'd simply handed her the enrollment forms already filled out. "Education is never wasted," he'd said, remembering his own father's words. Now, as Grace contentedly played with his tie, Jonathan observed Evelyn's brow furrowing over a math problem. "Need any help?" he offered. She looked up gratefully. "Actually, yes, these word problems are tricky." He shifted Grace to one arm and used his free hand to point at the textbook. "Think of it like a puzzle. First, identify what you're trying to solve." The afternoon light slanted through the windows as they worked through the problems together. Grace eventually dozed off against his chest, her warm weight both familiar and new. He'd held her like this nearly every day for 4 months, yet each time still felt like a gift he hadn't earned. Later, he passed the living room and paused. Evelyn sat in the rocking chair, Grace awake again in her lap, reading aloud from a worn Bible. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart." She read from Proverbs, her voice gentle but clear. "And lean not on your own understanding." Jonathan stood silently in the doorway, memories washing over him. Helen had read those same words, in that same chair, to their daughter Sarah. He'd dismissed it then as simple tradition. But now, watching Evelyn stroke Grace's hair as she read, something stirred in his chest, like a seed long buried finally reaching towards the light. "In all your ways acknowledge him," Evelyn continued, "and he shall direct your paths." Grace reached up to pat her mother's cheek, and Evelyn kissed her tiny fingers. The simple gesture of love, the peace in their faces, touched something deep within Jonathan's soul. Faith, he realized. Not the confident certainty he'd once rejected, but something more tentative and real, like the first green shoot breaking through snow. That evening, Lydia outdid herself with dinner. The table was set with Helen's good china, something that would have seemed wrong just months ago, but now felt right. Steam rose from a perfect roast, surrounded by roasted vegetables and fresh bread. "My goodness," Lydia said, standing back to survey her work. "This table hasn't looked this festive since—" She trailed off, glancing uncertainly at Jonathan. "Since Helen," he finished softly. But there was no bitterness in his voice, only a gentle acknowledgement. "The house feels different now," Lydia ventured, arranging a napkin. "More alive, like it's waking up from a long sleep." Jonathan looked around the dining room, seeing it with new eyes. The curtains were drawn back, letting in the last rays of sunset. Grace's high chair stood ready beside Evelyn's place. A vase of fresh flowers, picked by Evelyn from the greenhouse he'd finally reopened, brightened the center of the table. "You're right," he said, surprising himself with a smile. "It does feel alive again." As they all settled into their seats, Jonathan felt another stirring in his heart. Without planning to, he found himself reaching for Evelyn's hand on one side and Lydia's on the other. "Shall we say grace?" he asked quietly. Lydia's eyes filled with tears, and Evelyn squeezed his hand gently. Even Grace, secure in her high chair, seemed to sense the moment's significance, watching with wide eyes. "Dear Lord," Jonathan began, his voice rough with emotion, "thank you for this food, for this home, and for—" He paused, swallowing hard. "For bringing new life to both. Amen." "Amen," Evelyn and Lydia echoed softly. Grace chose that moment to bang happily on her tray, making them all laugh. The sound of their shared joy filled the dining room, chasing away the last shadows of loneliness that had lingered there for so long. The first hints of spring whispered through the Colorado mountains, melting patches of snow and coaxing tiny buds from dormant branches. Evelyn walked the grounds of the mansion while Grace napped, watched over by Mrs. Park. Her feet carried her down winding paths until something caught her eye through the trees, a glint of glass and metal, half hidden by winter-dead vines. Drawing closer, she discovered an enormous greenhouse, its Victorian architecture matching the mansion's grandeur. Though dirty and overgrown, its bones were beautiful. Through grimy window panes, she could make out abandoned terracotta pots and empty planting beds. That evening, after tucking Grace in, Evelyn gathered her courage and knocked on Jonathan's study door. "Come in," he called, his voice distracted. She found him at his desk, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed documents. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she began, "but I found something today. The greenhouse behind the house." Jonathan's hand stilled over his papers. For a long moment, he said nothing. "It's beautiful. Evelyn continued softly. Or it could be again. I was wondering if I might try to restore it. He removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Helen's greenhouse, he said quietly. She spent hours there, had quite the green thumb. His eyes grew distant with memory. After she died, I just locked it up. I understand, Evelyn said quickly. I shouldn't have asked. I'm sorry. No, Jonathan said, surprising them both. He stood, walking to the window that overlooked the back gardens. It's been 5 years. Perhaps it's time. The next morning, they met at the greenhouse door. Jonathan's hands shook slightly as he fitted the old key into the lock. Inside, dust motes danced in the weak sunlight, filtering through dirt-streaked glass. Dead leaves crunched under their feet. Where should we start? Evelyn asked. Jonathan surveyed the space, memories flickering across his face. Helen always said a garden starts with good soil. They worked side by side, clearing debris and pulling withered vines from the walls. Evelyn found herself watching Jonathan when he wasn't looking, the way his shoulders gradually relaxed, how his movements became more purposeful as they worked. My mother used to garden, she offered as they filled bags with dead leaves. Before everything fell apart, we had a little vegetable patch behind our apartment. Jonathan paused in his work. You haven't spoken much about your family. Evelyn's hands stilled on a tangle of dried stems. Not much to tell. Mum left when I was 14. Dad, he tried for a while. Then he started drinking more. When I got pregnant, she swallowed hard. He said I was just like my mother, ruining everything. That's not true, Jonathan said firmly. Isn't it? Evelyn's voice cracked. I trusted Tyler. He said he loved me, said we'd get married. I believed him because I wanted to. Then when I told him about the baby, she wiped her eyes with her sleeve. He blocked my number. His parents told mine I was lying about it being his. Jonathan set down his work gloves, turning to face her fully. Listen to me, Evelyn. Trusting someone who betrays that trust doesn't make you wrong. It makes them wrong. But I should have known better. Should have been smarter, stronger. You're not ruined, Jonathan said quietly. You're being rewritten. Every day I watch you with grace, see how hard you work, how much love you have to give. Those aren't the actions of someone who's ruined. Tears spilled down Evelyn's cheeks. Jonathan awkwardly patted her shoulder, then surprised them both by pulling her into a brief, gruff hug. Over the next weeks, the greenhouse slowly transformed. Jonathan hired workers to repair broken panes and fix the heating system. Evelyn brought trays of seedlings, flowers and herbs she'd started in sunny windowsills. They worked together in the afternoons, Jonathan showing her how to repair the old irrigation system while she taught him the names of the plants she'd chosen. These will be morning glories, she explained, carefully transplanting delicate vines. They'll climb the trellis and bloom every sunrise, and here, lavender for peace and healing. Helen loved lavender, Jonathan said softly. She dried it for sachets. Their conversations deepened as they worked. Evelyn spoke of her fears, that she wouldn't be a good enough mother, that she'd fail at her studies, that someday someone would come and take Grace away. Jonathan shared his own struggles with faith after losing his family. I was so angry, he admitted one afternoon as they cleaned old pottery. Couldn't understand how a loving God could take them. Stopped believing, stopped praying. Stopped everything, really. But you took us in, Evelyn said. That night, in the storm, you could have turned us away. Jonathan was quiet for a long moment. Something made me open that door. Call it conscience, divine intervention. I'm starting to think maybe God wasn't as far away as I believed. Spring advanced, and the greenhouse bloomed to life. Flowers opened in waves of color, pansies and primroses, sweet peas climbing trellises, pots of herbs releasing their fragrance when touched. They brought Grace out to visit, watching her eyes widen at the butterflies that found their way inside. One morning, Evelyn arrived to find Jonathan installing a small brass plaque by the door. She leaned closer to read the elegant script. Grace's garden. Oh, she breathed, touching the letters. Jonathan. He shrugged, looking embarrassed. Seemed fitting. This place needed new life. You and Grace? You brought that back. That evening, after Grace was asleep, Evelyn sat at her small desk. She took out her best paper and wrote carefully. Dear Jonathan, thank you for giving me and my baby a place to grow. With gratitude, Evelyn. She slipped into his study and left the note on his desk, propped against his reading lamp. In the greenhouse, the first night-blooming jasmine was opening, its sweet scent carrying on the spring breeze like a prayer of thanksgiving. The Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, with spring sunshine warming the mountain air. Evelyn stood in the mansion's entryway, carefully adjusting Grace's tiny bonnet, while Jonathan watched from the stairs, keys jingling nervously in his hand. You don't have to come in with us, Evelyn said softly. I can call a car service. Jonathan shook his head. No, I want to. He straightened his tie, a gesture that reminded Evelyn of a schoolboy preparing for an important test. It's been 5 years since I've been to church. Helen would have wanted me to go back someday. Grace cooed from her carrier, reaching up to grab at dust motes dancing in the sunbeams. Evelyn smiled. She knows when something good is coming. The drive to St. Matthew's was quiet, with Jonathan gripping the steering wheel a bit too tightly. The small stone church sat nestled among blooming dogwood trees, its white steeple reaching toward the cloudless sky. As they pulled into the nearly full parking lot, several heads turned. That's Jonathan Hale's car. Evelyn heard someone whisper as they made their way to the entrance. She felt Jonathan stiffen beside her but kept walking, Grace's carrier secure in her grip. The foyer buzzed with pre-service conversation that hushed momentarily as they entered. Then, like a warm wave, the congregation's welcome washed over them. Elder women cooed over Grace, praising her cherubic features. Men nodded respectfully to Jonathan, careful not to overwhelm him with questions. Welcome, welcome. Pastor Caleb Meyer's gentle voice cut through the pleasant chaos. He was younger than Jonathan expected, perhaps in his early 40s, with kind eyes and salt and pepper hair. It's wonderful to see you here, Mr. Hale. And Evelyn? His eyes held a flash of recognition that made her pulse quicken, but his smile remained warm and genuine. They found seats near the back, though several people gestured them toward empty spots closer to the front. Jonathan seemed more comfortable maintaining a clear path to the exit. As the service began, Evelyn noticed him gradually relaxing, his shoulders dropping from their defensive height. The morning light streamed through stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns across Grace's peaceful sleeping face. The familiar rhythm of worship, standing, sitting, praying, brought tears to Evelyn's eyes. How long had it been since she'd felt safe enough to simply be still and know? When the choir rose for their anthem, the first notes of Amazing Grace filled the sanctuary. Jonathan went completely still beside her. Evelyn glanced over to see his eyes glistening, one hand gripping the pew in front of them. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. The harmonies soared, and Jonathan's composure cracked. A single tear tracked down his cheek as the congregation joined in the familiar hymn. Evelyn shifted Grace to one arm and quietly offered her free hand. After a moment's hesitation, Jonathan took it, holding on as if it were a lifeline. Through many dangers, toils, and snares I have already come. The words seemed to speak directly to their situation. The dangerous night of Grace's birth, the toils of keeping their secret, the snares that still lay ahead. Yet here they sat, a most unlikely family, bound together by grace indeed. After the service, as people filed out, Pastor Meyer approached them again. "Evelyn, might I have a word?" he asked softly. Jonathan tensed, but Evelyn nodded. They stepped into a small alcove while Jonathan stood guard nearby, bouncing Grace gently. The pastor's face was etched with concern. "Are you safe, child? I remember you from the youth group at First Baptist. When you disappeared—" "I'm safe," Evelyn assured him quickly. "Jonathan, Mr. Hale. He's been very kind to me and Grace." Pastor Meyer studied her face carefully. "The maternity home reported you missing. There are people looking for you." Evelyn's hands began to tremble. "They wanted to take her away. Said a teenage mother couldn't possibly—" She took a shaky breath. "Please, Pastor Meyer. Grace is everything to me." The pastor placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I understand, and I believe you're exactly where God meant you to be. Just be careful. People talk, especially when it involves someone like Jonathan Hale." The drive home was quieter than the journey to church. Evelyn could see Jonathan processing everything, the music, the memories, the subtle warnings in the pastor's words. Once home, after Grace was fed and settled for her nap, Evelyn found Jonathan in his study, staring out the window. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I shouldn't have pushed you to go. Now people will talk even more." "Don't apologize." Jonathan turned to face her. It was time. Past time, really. He gestured for her to sit. "But we need to talk about what the pastor said." Evelyn sank into the leather armchair, twisting her hands in her lap. "I'm scared," she admitted. "The maternity home has connections, resources, and my parents. If they find out where I am—" "Listen to me." Jonathan's voice was firm but gentle. "If anyone tries to take Grace from you, they'll go through me first." The intensity in his eyes told her he meant every word. "I have resources too, more than they could imagine. But your reputation, your company, don't matter, not compared to—" He paused, seemingly surprised by his own certainty. "Not compared to family." The word hung in the air between them, weighty with meaning. Before either could speak again, Lydia appeared at the door, her face concerned. "Mr. Hale, you need to see this." She held out her tablet, open to a social media page. There, already gathering thousands of likes and comments, was a photo taken at church that morning. Jonathan stood holding Grace, sunlight from the stained glass windows creating a halo effect around them both. The caption read, "Billionaire Jonathan Hale's secret family. Who's the mystery baby?" Evelyn's heart sank as she watched Jonathan scroll through the comments, each one wilder than the last. Speculation about secret marriages, hidden affairs, and custody battles filled the screen. Their quiet sanctuary was about to become very public indeed. "It's starting," she whispered, fear coating her words like frost. The storm we knew was coming. Jonathan set the tablet down with deliberate calm. "Then we'll weather it together." He met her worried gaze with steady resolve. "I meant what I said, Evelyn. You and Grace are family now, and I protect my family." Outside, spring birds continued their cheerful songs, unaware that the peace of the morning had shattered like the stained glass rainbows that had blessed their worship. Inside, 3 hearts beat in uncertain rhythm, one peaceful in sleep, 2 awake and afraid, but stronger together than apart. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 12, marking the end of a morning that had changed everything. The photo continued to spread across the internet like wildfire, each share and comment building the storm that threatened their carefully constructed peace. But in Grace's nursery, the baby slept on, her tiny hands curled into fists, while two people who loved her prepared to fight for the family they'd become. The media circus descended by Wednesday morning. Black vans with satellite dishes crowded the street outside Jonathan's gates, their logos blazing in the spring sunshine. Camera crews stood ready, microphones poised like weapons. Inside the mansion, Evelyn watched through the curtains, her heart pounding as reporters shouted questions at anyone who approached. "Mr. Hale, is it true you're harboring a runaway teen mother? What's your relationship with the girl? Why are you hiding her from authorities?" The headlines screamed across every news channel. Breaking: Billionaire CEO Jonathan Hale harboring teenage runaway. Mystery baby at Hale Mansion, the truth revealed. Sources confirm: missing teen mother found with reclusive billionaire. Jonathan's phone wouldn't stop ringing. His assistant had to set up a separate line just to handle the flood of calls from board members, shareholders, and reporters. By noon, an emergency board meeting was called. "I have to go," Jonathan told Evelyn, straightening his tie. "Stay inside. Keep the curtains drawn. Mrs. Park and Lydia will be here." Evelyn clutched Grace tighter, nodding. "I'm so sorry, Jonathan. This is all my fault." Tears welled in her eyes. Maybe we should leave. I never meant to cause you so much trouble." Jonathan paused at the door, his face softening. "No, that's not happening." His voice was firm but gentle. "You're staying right here where you belong." The board meeting was exactly as brutal as he'd expected. 20 faces stared at him across the polished conference table, their expressions ranging from concern to outrage. "This is a PR nightmare, Jonathan," Marcus Wheeler, the head of the board, said. "Our stock dropped 8 points this morning alone. We need answers. And you'll have them." Jonathan remained calm, though his fingers clenched the armrests of his chair. "I'm releasing a statement today." "A statement?" Wheeler scoffed. "We need more than that. We need you to fix this. Send the girl somewhere else. Pay her off. Whatever it takes." "No." Jonathan's voice cut through the murmurs like steel. "That's not happening." Back at the mansion, Evelyn paced the nursery, singing softly to Grace to drown out the shouts from the reporters outside. Mrs. Park brought her tea, patting her hand. "Don't you worry, dear. Mr. Hale knows what he's doing." By late afternoon, Jonathan's official statement hit the news. Several months ago, during a dangerous winter storm, a young woman in desperate need sought shelter at my home. As any decent human being would do, I provided aid to someone in distress. She remains a guest in my home, where she and her infant daughter are safe and cared for. I ask that their privacy be respected during this difficult time. Any further questions can be directed to my legal team. The statement sparked fresh chaos. Some praised his compassion, others suggested darker motives. Conspiracy theories bloomed online like poisonous flowers. That night, Jonathan found Evelyn in the nursery. She sat in the rocking chair, tears streaming down her face as she cradled Grace. "I've ruined everything," she whispered. "Your reputation, your company. I should never have come here that night." Jonathan knelt beside the chair, his own eyes glistening. "You saved my life that night, Evelyn." His voice cracked with emotion. "This house was dead. I was dead inside. You and Grace. You brought life back. Hope back." He touched Grace's tiny hand. "Faith back." Evelyn's sob caught in her throat as she saw the truth in his eyes. The bond between them had grown into something precious. A father's love, pure and protective, filling the void in both their hearts. But their moment of peace shattered the next morning when a sharp knock echoed through the house. Lydia opened the door to find a stern-faced woman in a business suit, flanked by 2 police officers. "I'm Sandra Martinez from Child Protective Services." She held up an official document. "I have an emergency order to take custody of the infant Grace Hale Carter pending investigation of her living situation and the mother's fitness for care." "No!" Evelyn's scream pierced the air as she clutched Grace tighter. "You can't take her, please!" Jonathan stepped forward, his voice tight with controlled fury. "My lawyers will fight this." "They can contest it in court," Martinez replied coolly. "But for now, the baby comes with us." The next few minutes passed in a blur of tears and screams. Mrs. Park helped pack a bag with Grace's essentials, her own hands shaking. Lydia held Evelyn as the social worker took the baby, trying to keep her from collapsing. Jonathan watched helplessly as they carried Grace to the waiting car, her tiny face scrunched in confusion at being separated from her mother. Evelyn's sobs echoed through the mansion, a sound of pure anguish that seemed to shake the very foundations. As the car pulled away, Jonathan's fists clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. Everything he believed in, every bit of renewed faith, felt like it was being tested. The morning sun seemed to mock them, shining cheerfully on the worst moment of their lives. Inside, Evelyn had collapsed on the nursery floor, clutching Grace's blanket. Jonathan knelt beside her, pulling her into his arms as she sobbed. No words could comfort this pain, but he held her anyway, his own tears falling silently. The empty crib stood witness to their grief, while outside, the media circus continued its relentless coverage, unaware of the hearts breaking behind the mansion's walls. Mrs. Park and Lydia stood in the doorway, their own faces wet with tears, watching as the man who had once locked away all emotion now openly wept with the daughter of his heart, both of them shattered by the absence of the baby who had brought them together. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 10, each chime marking another minute without Grace, another minute they would have to survive until they could bring her home. The mansion became a fortress under siege. News vans clogged the street, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like accusatory fingers. Reporters shouted questions through the gates, their cameras flashing like lightning in a storm that wouldn't end. Inside, Jonathan paced his study, phone pressed to his ear as his board members took turns expressing their outrage. Their voices blended into a chorus of disapproval. "This is a PR nightmare, Jonathan," Marcus Chen, the lead director, said sharply. "Our stock has dropped 12% since this story broke. Investors are nervous." "I don't care about the stock," Jonathan replied, his voice hard as steel. "That's exactly the problem." Another board member cut in. "You're not thinking about the company anymore. We're calling an emergency meeting tomorrow. Either you distance yourself from this situation, or we'll be forced to consider new leadership." Jonathan ended the call without responding. Through his window, he watched another news van pull up. The headlines scrolled through his mind. "Billionaire CEO harbors teenage mother. Hale Industries in crisis. Questions mount about relationship with minor." Upstairs, Evelyn hadn't left her room in 2 days. Mrs. Park knocked softly, carrying a tray of food that would likely go untouched. "Dear, you need to eat something." Evelyn lay curled on her bed, clutching Grace's favorite stuffed rabbit. Her eyes were red and swollen, her face pale. "I can't," she whispered. "Not without her." Mrs. Park set the tray down and sat beside her, stroking her hair. "The lawyers are working hard. We'll get her back." But in the hallway, Jonathan's legal team painted a grimmer picture. "They're building a case against you," Richard Morton, his chief counsel, explained. "Harboring a runaway minor, possible obstruction of justice, the fact that you didn't report her presence immediately. She was in labor during a blizzard." Jonathan's voice echoed off the walls. "The law doesn't care about circumstances," Morton replied. "They're questioning your judgment, your motives, and with your position, the scrutiny will be intense." Evelyn, who had crept to the stairs to get water, froze as she heard their voices. Her heart pounded as the weight of reality crushed down on her. "What are our options?" Jonathan asked. "Honestly, the best move would be to cooperate fully with authorities. That means letting them place both Evelyn and the baby in state care until—" "Absolutely not." Jonathan cut him off. "Then you're risking everything. Your company, your reputation, possibly your freedom." Evelyn backed away from the stairs, her hands trembling. All the warmth and safety she'd found in this house suddenly felt like a lie. She'd brought chaos into Jonathan's ordered world, destroyed everything he'd built. That night, after the house grew quiet, Evelyn moved like a ghost through the darkness. She packed a small bag, taking only what she'd arrived with. In the nursery, she touched Grace's crib, remembering her daughter's sweet smell, her tiny fingers, her peaceful sleeping face. At Jonathan's desk, she found paper and pen. Tears fell as she wrote, "Dear Jonathan, you gave me love when no one else did. You opened your home and your heart to strangers. I can't let you lose everything because of me. Grace and I will find our way. Please don't look for us. Your kindness saved us once. Now I have to save you. With eternal gratitude, Evelyn." She slipped out through the kitchen door, past the sleeping reporters in their vans. The night swallowed her whole as she walked away from the only real home she'd ever known. Dawn broke harsh and cold over the mansion. Jonathan found the note on his morning rounds, his hand shaking as he read the words. He ran to her room, already knowing what he'd find. Empty drawers, made bed, the ghost of lavender in the air. He sank into the rocking chair where she'd nursed Grace, surrounded by abandoned baby clothes and toys. The weight of loss pressed down on his chest until he couldn't breathe. First his wife and daughter, then Grace. Now Evelyn. Everyone he loved disappeared like morning mist. For the first time since Helen died, Jonathan Hale fell to his knees. His prayer came rough and unpracticed, but straight from his broken heart. "God," he whispered, "I don't deserve your help. I turned my back on you when Helen died. I buried myself in wealth and work and bitterness. But please, please don't punish them for my sins. Bring them back. Evelyn, Grace, all of them. I'll give everything away, live in a shack, anything. Just have mercy. Show me how to fix this." His tears fell on the soft pink blanket in his hands, as outside the cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions that no longer mattered. In the empty nursery, a billionaire CEO knelt like a beggar, asking not for profit or power, but for the return of the family he never knew he needed. The grandfather clock struck 6, each toll marking another minute without them, another crack in his heart, another prayer for mercy in a world that suddenly seemed too big and too cold without the sound of Grace's laughter and Evelyn's gentle voice filling its spaces with love. Jonathan's world narrowed to a single purpose: finding Evelyn and Grace. Sleep became a distant memory as he transformed his study into a command center. Maps covered the walls, marked with red pins showing every shelter, bus station, and possible refuge within a 100-mile radius of Denver. "Sir, please let us handle the ground search," Mrs. Park pleaded, setting down a fresh cup of coffee beside his untouched breakfast. "No." His voice was hoarse from hours of phone calls. "I have to do this myself." He called in every favor, every contact accumulated over 2 decades of business. Private investigators, local police contacts, shelter administrators. His phone rang constantly with updates, each one leading nowhere. The hollow ache in his chest grew with every dead end. At the 4th, homeless shelter that day, Jonathan showed Evelyn's photo to a tired-looking volunteer. "She might have a baby with her," he explained, his voice cracking. "She's just 17, please." The volunteer shook her head. "Haven't seen her. But with this weather, if she's out there—" She didn't finish the sentence. Snow had started falling again, light flurries that reminded him too much of the night Evelyn first appeared at his door. Jonathan pulled his coat tighter and headed to the bus station, his shoes crunching through fresh powder. The station buzzed with delayed travelers, their frustration filling the air alongside announcements of weather-related cancellations. Jonathan methodically showed Evelyn's photo to every ticket agent, every janitor, every security guard. Nothing. By evening, exhaustion forced him to stop at a small diner on the edge of town. The place was nearly empty, just a few truckers nursing coffee at the counter. Jonathan slid into a booth, ordering coffee he didn't want, just to have somewhere warm to sit and think. The small television mounted in the corner droned quietly, local news filling the silence. Jonathan barely registered it until he heard a familiar name. The search continues for 17-year-old Evelyn Carter, who allegedly manipulated Denver billionaire Jonathan Hale. His head snapped up. There on the screen was Evelyn's photo, not the recent one showing her gentle smile, but an older shot that made her look harder, troubled. The reporter's voice continued. Sources suggest Carter may have planned the entire scenario, targeting the wealthy widower during the Christmas storm. The coffee cup slammed down so hard it cracked, dark liquid spreading across the table like spilled ink. Several heads turned, but Jonathan barely noticed. His hands shook as he pulled out his phone. "Sarah, get the PR team together, now. Yes, I know what time it is, and book me for every major morning show tomorrow. It's time to tell the truth." Back at the mansion, his media team scrambled to prepare talking points. Jonathan paced the study, ignoring their suggestions about damage control and stock prices. "Sir," his PR director ventured carefully, "perhaps we should focus on distancing you from—" "No." Jonathan stopped pacing. "I'm done hiding, done letting others control the narrative." He walked to the window, watching snow drift past the security lights. "I want to tell them everything. About Helen. About that night. About why I helped Evelyn. But sir, the board. I don't care about the board anymore." His voice was quiet, but firm. "I care about 2 people out there in the cold who need help. If telling my story brings them home." The team worked through the night, but Jonathan barely heard their plans. In his mind, he kept seeing Evelyn's face, hearing her gentle voice reading Proverbs to Grace. The greenhouse lights glowed faintly through the falling snow, the new plants she'd lovingly tended now at risk of freezing without her care. At 3 o'clock in the morning, he found himself in the nursery, surrounded by the painful quiet. He picked up Grace's favorite stuffed rabbit, its soft fur still holding a trace of baby powder scent. "I'll find you," he whispered to the empty room. "Both of you, whatever it takes." His reflection in the nursery window looked older, worn by worry and lack of sleep. The man staring back at him wasn't the polished CEO the world knew. He was just a father, not by blood, but by choice, desperate to bring his family home. Lydia found him there as dawn approached, still holding the rabbit, his speech notes scattered around him. "The cameras will be here in 2 hours," she said softly. Jonathan nodded, not turning from the window. "I know what I have to say." He straightened his shoulders, steel entering his voice. "I'm done letting fear rule my life, done hiding behind walls and wealth. If I lose everything but bring them home safe, it's worth it." The snow fell harder as morning crept closer, adding another layer of white to a world already too cold, too empty. Somewhere out there, a young mother and her baby needed help. And Jonathan Hale, the man who once shut himself away from the world, prepared to lay his heart bare before millions. Because sometimes he realized, love means risking everything. Fresh coffee appeared at his elbow, Lydia's quiet way of supporting him. He sipped it slowly, watching the sky lighten degree by degree, rehearsing not the carefully crafted statements his team had prepared, but the truth his heart needed to tell. The grandfather clock struck 6, each chime echoing through the silent house. In less than an hour, cameras would roll, and Jonathan would step into the spotlight he'd avoided for years. But this time, he wasn't speaking as a CEO or a billionaire. He was speaking as a man who had learned, through an unexpected knock on a stormy night, that some things matter more than money or reputation. His hands steady now, Jonathan straightened his tie and whispered a prayer, not for himself, but for 2 souls lost in the storm, hoping they might see him and know it was safe to come home. The first news van pulled through the gates as the snow began to ease, its headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. Jonathan watched it approach, Grace's rabbit still clutched in one hand, his heart full of words that could cost him everything, or bring back everything that mattered. The press conference room at the Hale Industries headquarters buzzed with anticipation. Camera lights blazed, creating an artificial dawn inside the wood-paneled space. Reporters shifted in their seats, smartphones ready, while network cameras rolled silently from the back of the room. Jonathan stood behind the podium, his fingers gripping its edges until his knuckles turned white. His expensive suit couldn't hide the dark circles under his eyes or the slight tremor in his hands as he arranged his notes. But there was something else in his bearing, too, a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. Mrs. Park and Lydia watched from the side, worry etched on their faces. They'd tried to convince him to let his PR team handle this, but Jonathan had been adamant. Some truths needed to be spoken in person. The room fell silent as he cleared his throat. His first words came out barely above a whisper. 10 years ago, I lost my wife Helen and our daughter in a car accident. The cameras clicked furiously. I responded by building walls, around my house, around my heart. I thought I was protecting myself from more pain. He paused, taking a shaky breath. Then on Christmas Eve, during the worst storm we'd seen in years, someone knocked on my door. A 17-year-old girl named Evelyn, in labor, with nowhere else to go. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Jonathan's voice grew stronger. I could have turned her away. The old me would have. But someone, wouldn't let me. Maybe it was Helen's memory. Maybe it was God. But I let her in. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small stuffed rabbit, Grace's favorite toy. The cameras zoomed in as he set it gently on the podium. That night, I helped deliver her baby girl. She named her Grace. His voice cracked on the name. And over the next few months, I watched something incredible happen. This young woman, who had every reason to be bitter, showed nothing but gratitude and faith. She studied for her GED. She restored my wife's greenhouse. She filled our home with music again. Tears glistened in his eyes, but he didn't wipe them away. She taught me that sometimes God doesn't knock gently. Sometimes he sends a desperate girl into your storm to show you how to live again. The room was completely still now, every reporter transfixed. I know what the headlines have said, that I harbored a runaway, that I broke the law. Jonathan's jaw set firmly. But I want to be clear, Evelyn was never in danger in my home. She was safe, cared for, loved, because that's what family does. His voice rose with conviction. Yes, I said family, because that's what we became. Not by blood, but by choice, by grace. He gripped the podium tighter. And now they're gone. Grace has been taken by social services, and Evelyn... His voice caught. Evelyn ran away because she thought she was protecting me. Looking directly into the main camera, Jonathan spoke with raw emotion. Evelyn, if you're watching this, please come home. You didn't ruin anything. You saved me. You and Grace gave me back my heart, my faith, my reason for living. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. The room erupted with questions, but Jonathan wasn't finished. To the board members threatening to remove me, go ahead. To those questioning my judgment, I don't care. Some things matter more than stock prices and reputations. Sometimes love costs everything, and I'm willing to pay that price. Miles away, in a church basement, warmed only by a struggling space heater, Evelyn sat on a worn couch, watching the press conference on a small TV. Grace's photo was clutched to her chest. Tears streamed down her face as she watched the man she'd come to love as a father defend her before the world. No one had ever done that before. No one had ever chosen her over their own interests. No one had ever called her family and meant it. The church pastor's wife sat beside her, offering tissues and quiet support. On screen, Jonathan continued answering questions with unwavering honesty, telling their story not with shame, but with pride and love. He never stopped looking, the pastor's wife said softly. He's been to every shelter in 3 counties. Evelyn's hands shook as she watched Jonathan hold up Grace's rabbit, telling the reporters how the baby had smiled for the first time while clutching it. How he'd spent hours in the greenhouse with them, rebuilding not just the garden, but their lives. How Evelyn's faith had rekindled his own. Sometimes, Jonathan was saying on screen, God's greatest gifts come disguised as our greatest challenges. I thought I was helping a desperate girl, but she ended up saving me. The press conference was going viral even as it happened. Social media exploded with clips and quotes. Bring Them Home started trending. People shared stories of their own chosen families, their own moments of grace in storms. Watching from her hiding place, Evelyn saw not the cold, distant man who had first opened his door on that snowy night, but a father fighting for his family with everything he had. She saw love that wasn't afraid of judgment or cost. She saw home. The pastor's wife squeezed her hand. What do you want to do, dear? Evelyn wiped her eyes, her decision made. It was time to stop running. Time to trust that love, real love, was stronger than fear. In the conference room, Jonathan finally stepped away from the podium, emotionally drained, but standing taller than he had in years. His phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. We saw you on TV. Evelyn's safe. Come get your daughter. He showed the message to Mrs. Park, who burst into tears of relief. Lydia was already grabbing their coats. Outside, the morning sun broke through the clouds, melting away the last traces of snow. The storm was finally ending. And somewhere, in a small church basement, a family was about to be reunited. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the church basement's worn linoleum floor. Evelyn's hands trembled as she dialed the shelter hotline number. Each ring echoed in her ears like a heartbeat. Safe Haven Shelter Hotline. How can I help you? Evelyn's voice came out barely above a whisper. My name is Evelyn Carter. I need to come home. The kindly pastor's wife sat beside her, one arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders as Evelyn gave her location. When she hung up, tears streamed down her face. He's really coming? She asked, clutching Grace's photo tighter. After that speech last night? Wild horses couldn't keep him away, the pastor's wife assured her, squeezing her hand. Outside, fresh snow blanketed the world in pristine white. Evelyn paced by the window, alternating between watching for Jonathan's car and helping the pastor's wife fold donated blankets to keep her hands busy. What if he's angry? She wondered aloud. Did you see that man on television? There wasn't an ounce of anger in him, just love. 3 hours later, a familiar black SUV pulled into the church parking lot. Evelyn's heart leaped into her throat as she watched Jonathan step out, his tall figure cutting through the swirling snow. He looked different from the polished CEO who'd given the press conference. His tie was loose, his hair slightly disheveled from driving. He took the church steps 2 at a time, following the pastor's directions to the basement. When he appeared in the doorway, Evelyn froze. For a moment, they just stared at each other across the room. Then Jonathan crossed the space in 4 long strides and pulled her into his arms. Evelyn broke down, sobbing into his coat. "I'm so sorry," she choked out. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought—" "Shh." Jonathan's own voice was thick with emotion. "You were the one teaching me grace all along. I just didn't see it until you were gone." He pulled back just enough to look at her tear-stained face. "When you left, it wasn't just grace I was missing. You became my daughter too, somewhere along the way. And I'm not letting either of you go again." The pastor's wife discreetly wiped her eyes as she watched their reunion. She'd seen many broken people come through her church doors, but rarely had she witnessed such pure healing. Jonathan gathered Evelyn's few belongings while she said goodbye to the kind couple who'd sheltered her. The pastor pressed a small Bible into her hands. "Remember," he said softly, "family isn't just about blood. It's about who God puts in your path." The drive home was quiet but peaceful. Snow fell in gentle flurries as they wound their way back to the mansion. Evelyn noticed extra security at the gates, keeping the persistent reporters at bay. "They've been camping out since the press conference," Jonathan explained. "But don't worry, they can't get past the fence." Inside, the mansion welcomed them with warmth and light. Mrs. Park and Lydia were waiting in the foyer, both crying happy tears as they embraced Evelyn. "The house hasn't been the same without you," Lydia sniffled, smoothing Evelyn's hair. "Neither has he," Mrs. Park added, nodding toward Jonathan. That evening, as snow continued to fall outside, they gathered in the living room. The piano stood silent but hopeful, waiting for music to return. Jonathan's phone buzzed constantly with messages from his legal team, working to reunite them with Grace. "The public support has been overwhelming," he told Evelyn, showing her the thousands of encouraging comments and shares from his speech. "People are demanding Grace be returned to you." 3 days later, their prayers were answered. A social worker brought Grace home, healthy and smiling. The moment Evelyn held her daughter again, the entire household seemed to exhale in relief. "She's gotten so big," Evelyn marveled through happy tears. "But she hasn't forgotten you," the social worker assured her, watching Grace instantly calm in her mother's arms. "Babies know their mothers." Jonathan stood back, watching them reunite, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. This was what his wife would have wanted. Their home filled with love again, grace flowing freely. The following week brought more good news. Jonathan's board of directors, moved by the overwhelming public support and touched by his unwavering commitment to his newfound family, voted unanimously to reinstate him as CEO. But something had shifted in Jonathan's priorities. During the first board meeting after his reinstatement, he announced his intention to step back from day-to-day operations. "I'll remain as chairman," he told them, "but my heart belongs to something higher now." Instead of endless business meetings, he spent his days helping Evelyn prepare for her GED exam. They worked together in Grace's garden, watching new life bloom alongside their healing hearts. The greenhouse became a sanctuary again, filled with the sound of baby laughter and quiet prayers of gratitude. In the evenings, music once again floated through the mansion as Evelyn practiced on the piano, Grace cooing contentedly in her basket nearby. Jonathan often found himself pausing in doorways, watching them together, marveling at how God had answered prayers he hadn't even known to pray. The media eventually lost interest in their story, moving on to newer scandals. But within the mansion's walls, a miracle continued to unfold. The miracle of a family knit together not by blood, but by grace. One morning, as sunlight streamed through the greenhouse windows, Jonathan watched Evelyn teaching Grace the names of flowers. His wife's favorite roses were blooming again, their fragrance filling the air with memories that no longer brought pain. "Thank you," he whispered, both to heaven and to the two souls who had brought his heart back to life. Grace reached out with tiny fingers to touch a rose petal, and Evelyn's gentle laugh echoed through the greenhouse. In that moment, Jonathan knew with absolute certainty that this love, this family, this Grace, was worth more than all the business success in the world. This was what it meant to be truly rich. The seasons turned like pages in a book, each one bringing new life to the mansion on the hill. What had once been a tomb of memories transformed into a sanctuary of hope. Jonathan, inspired by Evelyn's journey, established the Grace Haven Home Foundation, converting part of his sprawling estate into a refuge for young mothers in crisis. "Every girl deserves a chance at Grace," he told the Board of Trustees during the foundation's first meeting. The same business acumen that had built his fortune now served a higher purpose. Evelyn threw herself into the work with passionate dedication. Her own experiences made her uniquely qualified to counsel the scared young women who came through their doors. She sat with them during late-night fears, held their hands through labor, and celebrated their small victories. "You're not alone," she would tell each new arrival, cradling baby Grace on her hip. "I was where you are, and look at us now." The mansion's halls, once silent, now echoed with the sounds of life. Babies crying, mothers laughing, and the constant hum of hope at work. Jonathan added a new wing specifically designed for the foundation, complete with private rooms, a nursery, and counseling spaces. Through it all, Grace toddled around like a tiny ambassador of joy, bringing smiles wherever she went. Her first steps happened in the greenhouse, reaching for a bright yellow daffodil, while both Jonathan and Evelyn watched in tearful amazement. Evelyn's determination to complete her education never wavered. She studied late into the nights after Grace was asleep, working through practice tests and essays. When she finally received her high school diploma, Jonathan hosted a surprise graduation party in the garden. "I'm so proud of you," he told her, his voice thick with emotion. "You've shown these girls that anything is possible." As Grace's first birthday approached, the entire household buzzed with excitement. Lydia and Mrs. Park outdid themselves decorating the garden with streamers and balloons. Volunteers from Grace Haven Home helped set up tables laden with food and a cake decorated with tiny pink roses. The party itself was a testament to how much had changed in 1 year. Young mothers from the foundation gathered with their babies, sharing stories and hope. The pastor who had sheltered Evelyn gave a blessing. Even some of Jonathan's board members attended, their corporate facades softening as they watched the children play. Grace, dressed in a pale yellow dress that matched the summer flowers, was passed from arm to arm, spreading joy with her infectious giggles. She had grown into a happy, peaceful child, seemingly aware of her role in this story of redemption. During a quiet moment, Jonathan found himself holding her near the rose bushes where everything had begun to change. She reached up to pat his cheek with tiny fingers, and his heart swelled with love. "You saved 2 souls that night, little one," he whispered, watching Evelyn across the garden as she helped another young mother comfort a fussy baby. "Mine and your mama's." Evelyn caught his eye and made her way over, her face glowing with happiness and unshed tears. The sight of them together, the man who had lost everything and found it again, the girl who had nothing and gained a world of love, and the baby who had brought them together, painted a picture of Grace made real. "Look how far we've come," Evelyn said softly, joining them by the roses. Her eyes shone bright with tears of gratitude, reflecting all the joy and healing this year had brought. The foundation had already helped dozens of young mothers find their footing, and more came seeking shelter every month. Each one carried a story of pain, but within the mansion's walls they found what Evelyn had discovered that snowy Christmas Eve, that grace could rewrite any story, and love could build bridges across the deepest chasms. As the party continued around them, the three stood together in their own quiet bubble of gratitude. The greenhouse behind them bloomed with new life, the piano inside waited for evening lullabies, and the future stretched before them, bright with promise. They had become more than just helpers and helped. They were family, bound together by something stronger than blood, the power of grace freely given and gratefully received. Snow drifted down in gentle swirls outside the mansion windows, each flake catching the golden glow from the Christmas lights that lined the property. One year had transformed the once silent halls into a sanctuary of warmth and hope. Garlands draped the banisters, and the scent of pine and cinnamon filled the air. In the greenhouse, despite winter's chill, flowers bloomed in defiant beauty. Pink roses, white lilies, and purple violets created a rainbow beneath the glass panels, a testament to Evelyn's devoted care. Small heating lamps hummed quietly, keeping the delicate blooms alive even as frost painted patterns on the outside of the glass walls. Upstairs in the nursery, Evelyn gently lowered 1-year-old Grace into her crib. The baby's eyes were already heavy with sleep, her tiny fingers curled around her favorite stuffed lamb. Evelyn tucked a soft blanket around her daughter, marveling at how much she'd grown. Grace's dark curls framed her peaceful face, and her breathing soon settled into the gentle rhythm of dreams. "Sweet dreams, my precious gift," Evelyn whispered, placing a soft kiss on Grace's forehead. She adjusted the baby monitor and quietly closed the door, leaving it open just enough to let a sliver of hallway light peek through. The mansion's grand living room glowed with the warmth of a crackling fire. Jonathan stood by the hearth, 2 steaming mugs of hot cocoa waiting on the coffee table. He smiled as Evelyn joined him, passing her a mug topped with tiny marshmallows, just the way she liked it. They settled into the comfortable silence they'd grown to share, watching the flames dance while snow continued to fall outside the tall windows. The Christmas tree stood majestically in the corner, its lights twinkling like earthbound stars. "It's hard to believe it's been a year," Evelyn said softly, curling her feet beneath her on the plush sofa. She wrapped both hands around her warm mug, breathing in the rich chocolate aroma. Jonathan nodded, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes—" He paused, taking a thoughtful sip of his cocoa. "Sometimes it feels like you and Grace have always been here." Rising from his seat, Jonathan walked to a small box on the mantel. From it, he carefully lifted an angel ornament, the one Evelyn had given him months ago as a thank-you gift. It was a simple thing, made of glass and wrapped with a silver ribbon, but it carried the weight of their shared journey. With deliberate care, he hung it on a prominent branch of the Christmas tree. The angel caught the light, sending prisms of color dancing across the walls. "This house used to be full of ghosts," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "Now it's full of grace." Through the windows, the outdoor lights twinkled against the falling snow, creating a magical scene that reminded Evelyn of that desperate night when she'd first arrived. She'd been so scared then, with nothing but faith and desperation to guide her. "Thank you for opening your door," she whispered, her eyes glistening with tears of gratitude. Jonathan turned to her, his face soft with affection. "No, Evelyn. Thank you for knocking." Upstairs, Grace slept peacefully in her crib, unaware of the profound impact her existence had made on so many lives. The baby monitor transmitted her gentle breathing, a quiet reminder of the miracle that had brought healing to a broken man and hope to a lost girl. Outside, snow continued to fall, coating the world in pristine white. But unlike the bitter storm of last year, this snow felt like a blessing, nature's way of marking their anniversary with beauty. The greenhouse lights glowed softly in the distance, a beacon of life and growth even in winter's embrace. Through the baby monitor came the soft sound of Grace sighing in her sleep, a sound that never failed to make both Jonathan and Evelyn smile. It was proof that even the coldest winters could bloom again with love and faith, a testament to the power of grace freely given and gratefully received. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.